Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today I want to talk a little bit about the Xbox One X, which is formerly Project Scorpio. So before I begin, I'm going to be working from a chart from Kotaku, which the link is in the description down below. Check that out, but it's just a chart that compares all three Xbox One generations to each other, and you can sort of see side by side how each of them stacks up spec for spec. So much like the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X does retain a lot of its physical characteristics. It's basically the same exact size as the One S. It keeps much of the aesthetic pretty much the same as well, which is a good thing in my mind. The Xbox One S was a humongous improvement over the original Xbox One, and the One X looks like it is also going to be that same sort of low profile and very simplistic design, and I think it'll look good in most entertainment systems. That being said, it is significantly heavier. Not that that will really matter for the end consumer. At 2 pounds heavier inside the same form factor, that's sort of impressive. Makes me think that there's probably a lot of extra beefier cooling solution in there as well, which if you are any sort of person that has any history with Xbox, you'll know that that used to be a big deal for the Xbox and the Xbox 360 especially. So definitely heavier, but like I said, if it's sitting on a shelf, it's really not going to matter for the vast majority of people. In addition, the GPU's clock speed is a bit higher on the One X, about 1.1 and change gigahertz versus around 914, I believe, megahertz for the One S and the original. So that is nice to see that there's a little clock speed increase. What's a bigger deal, though, is the 40 compute units on the One X versus the 12 on the One S. That's a big leap. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that that's a humongous jump. And the translation there is going from 1.4 teraflops to 6.0 teraflops. Now, teraflops are not this end-all be-all number. You can't judge graphical performance just based off of the teraflops of a graphical solution. However, 1.4 to 6.0 is more than a little bit significant. It is really nice to see, and even if we don't get 4K gaming on all the games with really top-notch graphical settings, which I suspect we won't be getting the absolute best 4K that's possible, I believe that that'll still reside on the PC side of things just because you can max out settings there, whereas developers will have to sort of tune it to a graphics card that is still only 6 teraflops. And although that's very impressive, don't get me wrong, the big winner here, I think, is the people that play on 1080p televisions. I think they're going to see a really nice improvement. What I'm hoping to see is a lot of games adopt the sort of, do you want the eye candy settings, which may run at closer to, in demanding games, maybe more like 30 FPS, or do you want a 1080p maxed out settings with a lot of that additional eye candy that you can get on 1080p side, anti-aliasing, maxed out texture settings, all that sort of thing. Even if it's just 2 presets of whether you want performance for 1080p or if you want the eye candy for 4K, I'd really like to see that on the Xbox One games that come out that support the 4K playback. Either way, a really nice performance boost for anybody that's going to adopt the Xbox One X. And then sort of the last performance-based spec that I want to point out is the transition from 8 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM to the 12 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM. So we're transitioning to a true 12 gigs of GDDR5. Again, should give a nice performance boost to the One X compared to the One S with all that, first of all, the extra RAM buffer, but also the movement to GDDR5. And then, of course, there's a couple other not specifically performance-related specs that are sort of interesting to point out. The 245-watt power supply in the One X is a big jump over the 120-watt power supply of the One S. So looks like power consumption is going up significantly, but again, it's not really something the end user is going to care that much about. And then also the support for FreeSync once those displays start being produced, because it's FreeSync over HDMI. The specific HDMI standard that they are using for this has not been even ratified yet, so we don't actually have those TVs supporting FreeSync just yet. However, one would believe that those will be coming down the road. It's great that consoles will be getting some form of variable frame rate technology in their devices, so A+ on that one, Microsoft. And then, of course, the last number that really does matter a lot is pricing, and it will launch at $499 in the United States. So we are still paying the money that you could be getting a low-ish end gaming PC brand new, and you could definitely get a really solid computer for $500 if you're willing to buy used parts. As we've seen, the used market is often a good resource for people on a strict budget but trying to get the best out of their performance. In addition to all that, though, I do have a couple observations. First of all, the One X moves the Blu-ray slot from sort of a very prominent position in the Xbox One S. It's very obvious that it's there, and it sort of moves it down right to the bottom end of the top lip, and it almost sort of hides it to the point where when I first looked at it, and this was before I saw the specs, I didn't even realize that there was a Blu-ray drive there until I looked a little bit closer. So it looks like Microsoft is at least trying to minimize the aesthetic of that Blu-ray drive. But then my question is, will there be Blu-ray drives in the future on consoles, or are consoles also starting to follow the PC trend of removing the disk drive altogether? It's starting to look a little bit like maybe they are going to be removing that, and there are some really good reasons, at least for Microsoft, that they may want to remove that slot altogether, because by eliminating physical games, you really do eliminate the used game market. GameStop would be in a real pinch then. But also, you're forcing all the Xbox users onto the digital market space, which does eliminate the cost of producing physical game copies. Even if it's not a huge cost, it does eliminate that cost altogether, and it keeps everyone on a closed market system that Microsoft can make more money from, and ultimately that's what they're trying to do with a console. And of course, the other question that we have to consider is, will there eventually be Xbox One X exclusives? And I've sort of floated this idea ever since Project Scorpio was announced, but with having so much more power than the previous two generations of the Xbox One, it's not, at least in my mind, it's not crazy to think that not immediately, but down the road, as developers take more and more advantage of stronger and stronger hardware, and especially at the point when the Xbox One X starts to show its age in the hardware department, which will probably be several years until it really is starting to lag behind the PC at this point. But once it does start to really lag behind, well, we start to see developers go, okay, we can't keep trying to design these really great games for the Xbox One, because its hardware at that point will be extremely outdated. I mean, the Xbox One was already sort of underpowered when it launched. So I'm really curious to see if the Xbox One line ends up being sort of like, almost resembling the MacBook line, where new operating systems only support devices going back a few different generations. There will have to be either a new console line altogether that moves away from the Xbox One, or you would think they will have to start moving where games will only support back to certain generations of the console, which I believe the split would be the Xbox One S and prior, and then the Xbox One X, and whatever comes after that. Now, I think if Microsoft is going that route of keeping the Xbox One line intact and just iterating on it every year or two, then I think the best option for them would probably be to do something where they have a mandate for developers that they are dropping support for like the One and the One S, but developers must still support back to whatever generation it is that happens to be the generation that's starting to go out. So for the first couple years, it'd be you have to support back to the Xbox One X. So then at least consumers then would know games that are developed before this date have to go back this far. Or it might be more beneficial to just keep the architecture of the console so the games are still compatible, but then completely change the name of their future iteration. So maybe there's the Xbox for, we'll just call it the Xbox 2.
Which, of course, would make no sense.
And then they could tag in the description something to the effect of also supported on Xbox One X, so that people that are looking for the game know that the game is supported on their device, but then people that have bought the new consoles don't have the confusion of trying to figure out which console their game was produced for. Regardless, eventually, once the hardware disparity gets large enough, there's got to be a cutoff point, and at that point, I think there's sort of got to be this problem of consumer confusion in general that we may run into. And I'm really curious to see what direction Microsoft will go with that. And it looks like Sony is sort of following suit in the iterations of their current console instead of making brand new consoles. So I'm curious to see what direction Sony goes as well. And now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about the new console generation from Xbox, the Xbox One X? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you going to get one? Are you going to pass on one? Do you already own an Xbox One? What's your plans for the One X? Let me know down below. And as always, guys, if you like this content, give me a like, share, subscribe down below. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Hoosier Hardware. They are the same tag for your convenience. And as always, we'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you in the next video.